This is the one and only video you're going to need when deciding what kicker to start in the championship round of fantasy football. It all comes down to this. Today, I'll give you guys my top total rankings of every single kicker for week 17, and then give you my top 3 streamers that are available on your waiver wire right now. I don't understand how they are, number one, but you need to be starting them. They'll put up over 10 fantasy points. Make sure to stick around for that. And if you appreciate this video, please go down and hit that like button. It's a great way to send some positivity. It's free. It takes 2 seconds. It helps me and this channel out a ton, but I will never waste your time. Starting out in the S tier, we will have Will Reichard and Brandon Aubrey. Reichard has been absolutely automatic this year. It's not a question of if he'll make the kick, it's a question of how often is he going to get those field goal chances for the Vikings. They're pretty good in the red zone. They score a lot. So we have to hope for enough offense against the Packers to get in that red zone and get into the opposing side of the field, but not score a touchdown. Luckily, that's a pretty decent chance because the Packers are a pretty good defense, one of the best in the NFL in that metric. They are top 5 in sacks, interceptions, holding teams to little yardage. I mean, just look at last week. They held the Saints to 0 points. Now, it is the Saints offense. The week before that, they let the Seahawks only go for 13-2, so it's a good defense by all means. So all of this to say, this implied team total on this game is one of the highest of the week, so there's going to be a bunch of movement opportunities for field goals to be made, and hopefully not all touchdowns. Reichard has not missed an extra point so far this year and is 19 for 22 on his field goal attempts. We can tell a similar story here for Brandon Aubrey. He has no missed extra point attempts, and he's also only missed 5 out of 42 total kicks. One of the reasons why he's so good is because of the volume he gets at the kicking position. It helps that the Cowboys offense has been a lot better as of late with Cooper Rush compared to his beginning starts. It's looking a lot better. They are 4-1 in their last 5 games, averaging 27.4 points per game in that contest. Again, a lot of those are coming from kicks and not solely touchdowns. And the reason that's so important is because field goals are way more fantasy points than one extra point is. It's only one fantasy point. Every kick you get over 40, 30, 20, 50 yards, it's all extra points you want to be getting at the position. So they do get a tough matchup against the Eagles this week, but they aren't invincible. We saw the Commanders go for 36 on them last week. If anything, I expect the Eagles to keep the Cowboys out of the red zone and from scoring those touchdowns specifically. So maybe it's a good mix of good volume and no touchdowns for Aubrey in this matchup. But dropping it down to the A tier here, these are still guys that we can be starting very, very confidently. We have Jason Myers in a beautiful matchup against the Bears, who allow the 5th most points to opposing kickers this year and a ton of offense. A lot of that has to do with the amount of points that they let up to opposing teams this year. They allow the 6th most yards to opposing offenses and have been allowing 31 points per game over their last 5. So it's a very positive matchup to opposing teams in that aspect. And he only has 3 missed field goals on the year, one of those being a 60-yard attempt. I don't really count that one in his totals. My concern here is just the weather. That's literally it. There is a chance of rain, and some bad kicking conditions will definitely hurt kickers a lot more than it would hurt other wide receivers, quarterbacks. We always talk about that being a problem for them. It's also an even bigger issue for kickers, so just be aware of that. If the rain does build and continues to look like it's going to be bad throughout the week, then he will be a more risky option. But then we also have Brandon McManus in this tier with Chase McLaughlin and Chad Ryland. McManus is on the other side of that matchup. The Vikings defense has been really good this year, but it's a high scoring projected total game, which doesn't really make me worry about the defense too much. In his 9 starts for the Packers this year, he's only missed 1 kick, and it was a 40+ yarder, so he's still averaging 9 fantasy points a game since filling in. He should be a locked and loaded start for you. Chase McLaughlin has been benefiting from the Buccaneers offense in general. I mean, these guys are averaging 28.5 points per game despite losing Godwin halfway through the year and not having Mike Evans for a few games in there as well. This kind of offensive power has been what's allowing McLaughlin to be 8th in points per game at the kicker position, only missing 2 out of his 27 total field goal attempts, along with an insane amount of extra points he's made and attempted. And now he does get the Panthers, which are the #1 best matchup to kickers. They allow the most points per game in that aspect. And Bryce Young, he might have improved. The offense might have improved too, but the defense is still atrocious. There's nothing to worry about on that side. And I honestly might move him up a little bit, 1 or 2 spots, with the potential added on here with this matchup and the Panthers being a decently scoring team now. So the Buccaneers are going for a playoff spot. They're going to have to score. Ryland, he gets a neutral matchup against the Rams here in kicker points allowed. The defense itself for that team isn't necessarily amazing. It's a great kicking conditions though, so we don't have to worry about that, and he is a pretty automatic kicker despite the bad stint that he had with the Patriots last season. He's averaging 9.45 fantasy points per game this year since filling in week 5, and he's only rostered in 6% of leagues. He's a guy that we can plug and play pretty safely in this matchup. But dropping it down to the B tier, we are going to be starting with Jake Bates, Cameron Dicker, and Jason Sanders. Bates is another kicker benefiting from the offensive success of the Lions. I mean, it's just a masterclass at this point. They're averaging the #1 most points per game on the year, and he's the kicker 7 because of that. He's also #1 in total extra points made this year at 3.9 per game. So that's already a 4-point fantasy bump for you. It's going to be pretty safe every single week, all things considered. You have that locked in, and he also comes into a matchup against the 49ers, which is more on the positive side. He's only missed 1 out of his 6 total kicks, 50 plus yards or more. That's really solid. The volume is going to be there. The only problem here is that the offense never gets stopped in the red zone. If they're there, they're going to score. So despite having a good matchup and being the best in the NFL in field goal attempts and numbers on average, his team does go for it on 4th downs more than pretty much every team in the NFL. So that is going to be a little bit of a red flag if they continue to do that. And we have to consider that the 49ers are out of playoffs, and the Vikings, if they beat the Packers, the Lions don't really have much to play for as far as seeding goes. So maybe they sit their starters a little bit or restrict them. That's just speculation. We can't really rely on that, but still, it's a positive spot for Bates here. Cameron Dicker against the Patriots is another kind of negative matchup as far as fantasy points allowed to kickers, but the Patriots are at home. It's going to be a really cold game, which is more of a problem than most people expect. However, he is one of the most consistent kickers in the NFL with the Chargers. Their offense is good, which is also another plus. We don't have to take the gamble on the offense not showing up and him not getting points because of it. He's averaging 9.5 fantasy points per game. And when you look at Jason Sanders, he might be a little bit lower than you guys expect after that amazing matchup last week, dropping 23.7 fantasy points per game on the 49ers. Again, another reason why that 49ers and Bates matchup is going to be really positive as all things considered. But the Browns matchup is a tougher one. They allow the 10th least amount of points to opposing kickers, and this game is played in Cleveland, so it is going to be cold. There are going to be a bit of weather concerns as far as that goes. This is an issue for the offense and the kicker. We know the Dolphins themselves have a ton of bad history in cold weather games, so if the offense is at a disadvantage and they're not scoring as much, not getting in the red zone, maybe there's an issue for the kicker there. But again, that's more of a possible risk than it is an actual penciled in issue that we have to deal with. But dropping it down to the C tier, this is where we introduce the real red flags for these kickers here. We will start with Tyler Bass. In a matchup against the Jets, it's surprisingly the second best in the entire NFL in allowing fantasy points to kickers. The Bills, they did look bad last week against the Patriots, but you can expect a bounce back game from them offensively to get momentum moving into the playoffs. This game is at home. It is going to be cold for the Bills there, but we know that the Bills don't really have any issues with playing in the cold. That's almost like playing in the warm as far as the Dolphins go for them. Outside of that, though, it's one of the highest team totals of the week. We just have to hope that all of these offensive drives don't end in touchdowns so we can actually get some field goals. That's where the red flags come for Tyler Bass. Next up, we have Josh Carty in a great matchup against the Cardinals. They are top 7 in fantasy points allowed to the kicker position, and the Rams do play at home. If we look at his numbers, he is easily a way better kicker and more consistent kicker when he does play at home, so that is a plus there. Because he is more on the inconsistent side, that's been his real issue for the entire season. And the Rams, they do have a really good offense when all of them are healthy, so we do have to worry about those touchdowns being scored every single drive. We want them to end in the red zone, end in the 40-yard line, so they can get a deep field goal attempt and give us points to the kickers. It's always the hardest to predict in that aspect, though, because you want to be getting kickers on really good teams that can do that for you, but also not good enough to score touchdowns on every drive to where they're only scoring extra points. You see it every week. A team puts up 30, but it's only extra points, and they end up with like 5. So that's the back and forth issue that we do have with him. I will also put Jake Elliott in this tier against the Cowboys. He's a little bit lower than you might expect for the only issue that Jalen Hurts is at a pretty good possibility of missing this game. If he doesn't play, this offense is definitely going to be hurting and not getting the opportunities in the red zone that they usually would. Kenny Pickett looked decent against the Commanders, but the Commanders defense isn't something that needs to be written home about. So outside of that, Elliott himself has been also more on the inconsistent side this year, which is the literal worst thing you can be as a kicker. You only get so many attempts in the red zone and just field goal attempts in general that aren't extra points. When you get them, you have to make them work. You have to make them in order to be viable in fantasy football. So he's missed 7 out of 31 kicks this year. He only has 1 kick over 50 yards, so his big play upside isn't necessarily amazing, especially if we don't have Jalen Hurts in this matchup. But Matt Gay, next up here, getting the Giants, and you'd think this is a really amazing matchup, but for whatever reason, MetLife is one of the worst places to kick field goals. Like, you just always miss. But I do believe the Colts can generate enough offense to mitigate that risk. Their scoring projections are definitely at an increase compared to their every week average because of how bad the Giants team and defense is as a whole. There isn't a ton of security here in this one, so just be aware of that. But then we'll finish it out with Joey Sly in a surprisingly decent matchup against the Chargers, because we aren't expecting the Patriots to score a bunch of points. That's not how Joey Sly is going to get his fantasy viability. It's more of any offense they do generate is not going to end in a touchdown, so it probably will be a field goal, and that's going to be a plus for Joey Sly. The only issue is he isn't anywhere near one of the most consistent kickers in the NFL. The plus side is he does get a decent percentage of deep kick attempts over 40 yards because the offense just can't score. So there's a little bit of yin and yang in that if you want to be starting him. But dropping it down to the D tier, we are going to have some guys that are viable but very risky. Riley Patterson and Eddie Pinheiro are going to be here. Patterson is the definition of hit or miss this week because we have Michael Penix starting. They dropped 31 points last week, but it was against the Giants defense. We know that that version of a defense just does not exist. Luckily, Marshawn Lattimore is going to be out this week for the Commanders in this matchup of the Falcons and Giants. So we're going to have BSJ as the main corner for this matchup. So Drake London, Darnell Mooney, they should all have a day against the secondary. So the offense is going to be there. Hopefully, again, we're taking a big risk because we don't know what to expect with Michael Penix as far as his second real start. Patterson hasn't started a ton of games this year, only 3. So he is a bit more risky because we don't have the most data as far as this year with this offense goes. And the same goes for Pinheiro. He doesn't have the highest floor. He has 4 games over 10 fantasy points, but 7 games under 5. Luckily, the recent offensive success of Bryce Young and him coming back into this team is making him be more consistent. He's definitely had more boom games after that than before then, but they do get the matchup against the Buccaneers. It's a decent one. Their defense isn't amazing. Hopefully, Bryce Young can actually put together some offense, which isn't a far-fetched statement in this matchup. And maybe we don't get a ton of touchdowns from Bryce Young and the Panthers. They turn into field goals. That's going to be a positive for them. The Buccaneers are fighting for a playoff spot, so they could have a little bit of juice in them as far as the defense goes to keep them out of the end zone. Still not the strongest option though. We will finish it out with the F tier. I would not suggest you start these guys. Moody, York, Lutz, Santos, and Carlson are going to finish out the F tier, but there are so many amazing streaming kicker options that we can get off our waiver wire to win our championship that nobody is talking about. I think it's just because nobody cares about kickers to do the analysis. Another reason you should be liking this video and subscribing if you are new. Will Reichert is the #1 guy here. He's S tier. He's the #1 kicker of the week, but he's available in all of your waiver wires. He's only rostered in 10% of leagues, and I guess I get it. He's a rookie. He doesn't have a ton of name value yet, but he is a top 10 kicker in the NFL for a reason. He's 4th in extra points made this year. He is top 5 in field goals attempts made over 50 yards this year as well. The Vikings offense is great. There's no reason we shouldn't be rostering him, adding him, and starting him in our lineups this week. Brandon McManus is another guy that's top in these tiers, but only rostered in 23% of leagues. The other side of this matchup, we do have to be aware of the Vikings defense being really good. They are the #1 most negative to kicker points allowed, but again, we have to lean on this matchup being very high scoring. He is an option that you can go with. And Chad Ryland is another option at the kicker position you can pick up. He's only rostered in 6% of leagues. It has to be because of his name value and who the Cardinals are. The Rams are allowing the 12th most points to opposing kickers this year, so it's not an amazing matchup, but not bad by any means. This is the list of streamers that are just there and really viable options for you in the championship if you need it. That's going to finish off this video though. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video coming tomorrow. All glory to the man above.